Hey guys, welcome to Through the Bible Verse by Verse, a plain and simple study, verse by verse, chapter by chapter, book by book, through the entire Bible. We are currently in Genesis chapter 1, and we're going to continue the thought that I started, as I said, with Genesis, the first 11 chapters. I'm going to really take a look at it because there's a lot of stuff to unpack here in these chapters. So we've been talking about our first verse says, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. So that's God's claim. We believe it, and it is scripture. Now I've been talking about what sort of ideologies have been coming against these claims. I've talked about God versus science, and which is one of the biggest kind of thoughts here. God versus science. Is science against God? It's God against science. The answer is no, since God created science. And all of this in this statement here, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Packed in that statement is God created all of the science. So when we think about the universe, right, the awesomeness of the universe, then you also think about the molecules, the elements. Now you see that word elements even in scripture, and the elements is when you break everything down to its most basic structure. Those are the elements. Molecules, again, a whole bunch of stuff that I'm not going to even begin to try to cite. But that's the science of creation. In other words, those are the building blocks of creation. In other words, God had to create that first, then in order to create the universe. So there's a lot of there that, and I said, remember, the Bible isn't a scientific book. So no, the Bible doesn't explain all of that. As we look, in our finite mind, think about this too. We're gonna get to this probably in the next study. How old is the universe? Because that is a subject of discussion there, and I'm gonna get into that in the next study. But the idea is that however old it is, and when we look at the universe in its vastness, right? So just think about the universe in its vastness. You go up in an airplane. What's amazing about this, you go up in an airplane. Well, you don't have to go up in an airplane, you can go up on a high point, right? Whether it's a hilltop mountain. I've kind of been blessed to work in tall buildings. I've been on the rooftop of tall buildings. And it's amazing how small man is in retrospect, right? So just think about the vast land masses, right? If you fly in the airplane, and when they fly low enough on a clear day, you just see land. That's right. But just keep this in mind: the Earth, I think, is 70% water, and that's the interesting. It's 70% water. So that's but the Earth, as far as a planet, is even small, right? When you think about our universe, we get out into space. Jupiter is like 10, 15 times larger than the Earth. But then guess what? Our galaxy is just only one galaxy of millions, and some even say billions of galaxies within the span of the universe. So we are extremely small. We talk about these large spaces, but the universe has certain elements. And again, I'm refraining. I'm not trying to explain science here. I am in no way qualified to. But to look at it, in other words, when you look at it, to explain these things. And they're worth talking about because, again, as we move forward in time, God is not just a presumed creator or even influencer. Our faith is being challenged in big time. And science is one of these that is kind of where people are using science to challenge our faith. And so the question that I originally asked here was, does science or the theory of evolution disproves the claims of the Bible? Does science? And I'm going to say no, it doesn't. I'll get more into that when we talk about the how old is the earth. That's going to be, we get more into that. But so we was talking about God versus science, or God versus evolution, God versus, now I want to talk about God versus, religion or culture. See, because right here, our statement, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. So that means everything in here, everything in that you see, God created. And so ultimately God is the authority. So what happened? Well, obviously we have to, I'm not going to jump ahead. The third chapter happened. And again, that's going to fit in the puzzles. See, that's going to fit in the puzzles of just kind of understanding. Doesn't answer all of the questions, but it fits the puzzles. But when we think about the culture today, and then also religion, now there are most of the world, and I'm not going to, we'll flesh that out more as we move through, like chapters 4. And again, within this 11th chapter, we're going to see two things. We're going to see how personal religion and then paganism started. But the idea of then these false religious concepts, where did they come from? The same source, as I said when we talk about science. You start with a rebellion against God. The scientific humanism started, I kind of really took a spread in the 18th century. There were two things that happened in the 18th century. There was Darwinism, and then there was other religions, right? Mormonism, Jehovah's Witness, Christian Science. That's just to name three. But the idea was that they were a rebellion against the Bible. But paganism has always been around. The idea of false gods. And which is always interesting because, some people will ask, well, will God judge, that lost tribe up in the Amazon mountains, right, that have never seen society, right? In other words, if we used to travel and all of a sudden you discover this tribe 5,000 feet up into the mountains away from society, they don't have running water, no electricity, no TV, no social, The guy with the phones, he said, "Can you hear me now?" They're going to say, "No, we cannot hear you now," right? Well, God judged them because no one had ever reached them. No one had ever spread the gospel to them. Well, but the question that you have to ask then is that, are they pagan? Where did they get their religious beliefs? See? Unless they are science, which most of the times you won't find that they are, where did they get their religious beliefs? So if they're worshiping the sun god, they're worshiping whoever, why? In other words, if you look up in the sky and you say the sun, that's a god. Why? Why would you say that? So whatever the belief is, the question you can ask, why do they even believe that? So the point is that if you're following science, if you're following even, like you say, as one of the Psalms talks about, that the heavens declare the handiwork of God. So why would you conclude a man-made version of it? See, and that's the whole thing right now. Culture has evolved, and I want to deal with this situation that we're going through right now with pronouns. And believe it or not, this is not the first time we've dealt with that. There are translations of the Bible. I believe Sullivan, Bible Publishers, is coming out. There have been others throughout for the last couple of decades that have attempted to, and I'm going to say in the name of book sales, come out with a translation of what is called gender free, and with the push for the acceptance of the LGBTX ... whatever you want to let it. There is even more of, the emphasis on now. I think like with trans, I'm just not going to even try to conform to this, but the proper way now of communicating with trans people would be not he, she, but they or them, we, like that. Okay. Now that spilled over in the Bible, believe it or not, and it actually kind of even spilled over when the feminism kind of pushed for that. So you ask the question: is God a male or a female? Think about this right here. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, in this respect here, there is no male or female gender revealed in the statement, right? It just said God. But later on, we see the he pronoun, the male pronoun attached to God. Now, is it proper to say God, to speak of God in the even neuter, what they call neuter, neither male or female? If you wanted to be even more radical, can you refer to God as she? Right. Now, remember, these are all, and I'm going to say, perversions of what God has revealed. So these arguments exist among sinful man. See, the arguments doesn't even start from the timeline of the Bible here. These arguments doesn't start until after the 3rd chapter. So the question becomes, how did God reveal himself? And then you see man, sinful man, rebel against that. Now, one thing of note too, by the way, God, there's certain threads that you will see from Genesis to Revelation. Obviously, God, the supreme, the sovereign, Genesis to Revelation. But the other thing is the sinfulness of man. And I'll get more into that in this 3rd chapter. But the sinfulness of man, and oftentimes people would think that if you can just reason, or just if God, how come God doesn't just show himself? Well, he did, and remember they killed him. Okay. But going back to these pronouns, why is God presented in the male? Now, and it's important to understand that it's not gender here, or physical gender. And that's important. God is going to create male and female gender, physicality. God is not a physical. Okay, he's not physical. So God is spirit. But he is always pictured in the male. Now the male then detach yourself from the physical and then say that you cannot portray God as really even neutral or female. If you go to the hardware store, I'm just going to give you a concept here. If you go to the hardware store, you say, I want to buy a pipe. One of the things that you're going to see when you buy a pipe is they're going to say, do you want a male or a female fitting? Your garden hose on one end has what's called a male, and then the other end has what's called a female. The female end is always what receives, okay? And the male is always what supplies, right? So you hook the female end to your spigot, and then your other end is what supplies, okay? God is is always the male because he is the beginning, he is the creator, he is the giver. He supplies as his creation. We are, in that respect, the female fitting. We receive from God. And that's why you cannot portray God as female or even neutral, because God is not neutral. He is always the giver where his creation is concerned. So in the revelation that he has given of himself, that's why he is male, but not male from the standpoint of physicality or he doesn't have genitals and all that kind of stuff. It would be also interesting to note this is why Jesus came as a man and not as a woman. See, he's the giver. He's the giver of life. Okay, he's the giver of life. And so, when we talk about then the culture who tries to then say, well, we're going to say that, I'm trying to think, there was a movie where God was presented as the male, but these movies are so I'm not going to even say blasphemous, even though they are, but they were so crazy because if you start off with your position, what was the name of this movie? I think it was, and again, it was one of these movies that went out of its way to be insulting, to be blasphemous. And I can't think of the name. I think Ben Affleck was in it, and Chris Rock was in it, and like I said, God was pictured as a woman. So the point is that that's a perversion, and we're going to see that why that perversion persists. But you have to wait till we get to chapter 3, starting with the sinfulness of man, and there's a detachment. So again, the detachment is this is how man wants to see God versus how God has presented himself. And God has presented himself as the creator, which means he's always the giver. He's always the giver. So I would reject any kind of neutral or even female portrayal of God. That's not how God revealed himself. Alright guys, we're going to continue with our next thought. We're going to get into, I think, the age of the universe next time. Okay, thanks for tuning in. See you in the next study.